Shop the Sherwin-Williams Memorial Day sale and get 30% off paints and stains May 15th through the 28th. Whether you're refreshing your interior or exterior, we've got the colors to bring your vision to life. And with delivery, getting everything to your door is easier than ever. Shop online to have it delivered or visit your neighborhood Sherwin-Williams store. Click the banner to learn more. Retail sales only. Some exclusions apply. See store for details. Delivery available on qualifying orders.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Need Some Introduction. I'm your host, Victor, and on this podcast, we go week to week breaking down one of your streaming favorites. Currently on the feed, we are breaking down Your Friends and Neighbors. We have 3 episodes of that series yet to go. 2 more episodes of Euphoria. But of course, in this episode, we will be breaking down 2 different shows, actually. One, I'll be doing a solo breakdown of a cult horror comedy series on Apple TV called Widow's Bay, which has garnered very enthusiastic audience reactions and nearly unanimous critical praise, and continues to be a really thrilling watch week to week. So I'll be breaking that down. Next week, I'll have a co-host, hopefully, unless she bails on me. My sister will be joining me following the holiday to discuss not 1, but 2. We get 2 episodes of Widow's Bay next week. So now's the time to catch up, everybody, because you have 2 longer than average episodes. It's going to be about 80-minute watch next week. So plenty to discuss. One of the episodes is a black and white, I believe black and white, if I've been informed correctly, flashback episode, The History of the Island, directed by Ty West, who's done a lot of horror series directing, but of course, most famously recently, did the Pearl Maxine trilogy. So a pretty big name up and coming in the horror arena. And then a second episode, a longer episode, I think the longest episode so far, picking up things from where we leave off on this particular episode. So I'm going to start that breakdown in just a few moments. But also, of course, The Boys has wrapped up its entire series. And one of my co-hosts, Alan, a Boys superfan, will be joining for a full breakdown of that episode and a discussion as to me as a skeptic, my reaction to that finale, but very curious to get Alan's reaction as someone who's really always seen the best of this show. And I honestly do hope that he was entertained and satisfied by that conclusion. But we'll save all that for later in the episode. If you're only here for one topic or the other, check the show notes for timestamps. Some quick show notes before we get into the breakdown. Did you like the series finale of The Boys? Let us know. Need some introduction at gmail.com. Post a comment on any of our Spotify episodes or on YouTube. Or, of course, join our Patreon, which is completely free, and comment there as well. Speaking of the Patreon, now that The Boys is wrapped up, Alan and I have been rewatching all of Christopher Nolan's films leading up to this summer's most anticipated probably film, The Odyssey. And we'll be continuing next week. Next up is The Prestige, and then, of course, The Dark Knight, one of the most successful comic book movies, or just movies, period, financially, of all times. So I have been discussing Widow's Bay here on the podcast. Do check out the back catalog for the previous recap episodes. But I wanted to spend a little more time just talking about the talent behind the scenes as well. When we first started talking about this show, the name that popped out immediately, of course, was Hiro Murai, who is directing the first 3 episodes and of course has been involved in so much of the best offbeat, surprising TV products of the past 6 or 7 years, going back to Atlanta, Station 11, The Bear, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, all terrific projects. Barry, of course, on HBO as well. So that's why it came up on my radar and was really anticipating this. And then the reviews started coming in and were very stellar, which was kind of odd for this quirky comedic horror series. Always something that's tough to get right, I think. But of course, I kind of undersold the fact that this was really created by Katie Dippold, who was one of the writers and producers on Parks and Rec, but also wrote some big budget, but not always fully successful comedic horror films. The Ghostbusters reboot with that all-female cast, pretty controversial project, actually. Probably not intentionally so, but that's just how it played out. And a pretty unsuccessful as well reboot of the Haunted Mansion franchise at Disney. So a mixed bag. Of course, the Parks and Rec thing is definitely a badge for her of success. But how would all these things fit together? And of course, the whole idea, this is a horror comedy, very Stephen King influenced, seaside, spooky happenings going on. Almost everything that happens in the Castle Rock series all happening at once in this series of show. But also the element of, Parks and Rec, like just small town, I should say, politics and the minutia of running an old town with a probably very limited budget, municipal budget. And as I mentioned, Katie Dippold, not only the showrunner, but also the credited writer. Now, by the way, not oftentimes, but pretty much always, there is a writer's room. So the ideas are coming from this pool of writers, but those lead writers in that room almost always get at least one show that they get to put their name on. Now, it could be that they're just rotating what those names are. It could be that they were fully allocated that particular script to have the final revisions on it. So there's different ways to handle it. But normally, when you have a specific name on credited on an episode, that writer had an oversized influence on that particular episode. And not surprisingly, Katie Dippold as the sole credited writer on episode 1. You could imagine she probably did write the pilot by herself. And of course, also as the showrunner, not uncommon to have her name first, but I'm sure she's involved in the structure and the heading of this whole entire writer's room. But I do want to shout out the individual writers here as well. So of course, she gets credit for episode 1. And looking at the audience reaction, by the way, the first episode is the least well rated by that larger audience. I'm sure the sampling size is larger for that first episode. And understandably, it doesn't really hit the ground running, representing exactly what the show is. Very funny, mostly comedic. And this is something that's been happening, shifting from episode to episode, is that relatively little horror and a lot of comedy in that first episode, very much in the vein of a Parks and Rec with maybe a hysterical mayor who is influenced by the mythology of the island more than actually something supernatural going on. So maybe some of that teasing didn't really hit the audience correctly. But things picked up with episode 2 from an audience reaction. I actually think episode 1 was better than episode 2, but also very much liked episode 2. This is the one where the mayor basically gets challenged to stay at the local inn. And also when we see these kind of side POVs, we start to see that there are probably overtly supernatural goings on the island. And this episode, again, directed by Hiro Murai, but written by Kelly Galuska, who is known for writing BoJack Horseman and Big Mouth and a lot of adult comedy, mostly on Netflix, actually. And again, very heavy on the comedy, but definitely that menace coming mostly from the directing choices, but beautifully, just amazingly well-designed sets. These are mostly found locations, but feel like real locations that have been aged believably, and really effective second episode of the show. But then things really start to get going on the show with episode 3, the inaugural swim, where of course there's the comedy and the horror. To me, is the perfect blend in that episode. Just this perfect balance of the overtly comedic and horrific at the same time, and just the show pivoting into, no questions about it, this is overtly a horror series now. It's not about an unreliable narrator. It's about a supernatural haunting of this island. And really fascinating here, by the way, again, Hiro Murai directing, but credited writing to Neil Casey, who's an actor in this very series. He plays Kurt. So one of the pretty big background characters here. And again, a real highlight this episode, that perfect blend, literally perfect blend, I think, of the comedic and the horrific in perfect balance. But then for all the credit that is given to Hiro Murai as this, one of my favorite TV directors of all times, last week's episode, Beach Reads, is a near masterpiece. It doesn't have that perfect blend of comedy and horror. It is basically, or feels like, a bottle episode. You could watch this without any other context. And even up to the first 3 episodes, I just loved Kate O'Flynn playing Patricia. Always the best of all these incredible deadpans. Her deadpan is the absolute best. So these comedic asides, just the way she would deliver a line, incredible comedic highlights, although we really didn't center her point of view. And a shock in episode 4 to have an episode that is almost entirely from her POV. And this episode is painful to watch, tragic, funny in the most uncomfortable ways, and also truly horrific. Like, some of the imagery here is incredibly bold. And this one, directed by Samuel Donovan, who mostly is famous for directing some of the best episodes of Severance. But really, I don't see anything on his resume of having directed any films. But maybe he has the chops now after some of those Severance episodes, some pretty big budget, ambitious episodes, and now this and now this particular episode, last week's episode. And of course, also directing the episode I mentioned earlier, next week, On a Ship, Wick and the Mayor Loftus, picking up the plot from this particular episode in a very long episode. And I think this guy has got some chops. And that excellent episode was written by Mackenzie Dorr, who does a lot of TV writing. The pretty good Lock and Key, a Stephen King adjacent project, actually his son, based on one of his son's comic books, and WandaVision, which was an uneven series, but had some excellent, truly excellent episodes. So very strong writing on that series as well. And what a surprise. Really watching this show has been such a pleasure up until this point. I honestly don't know what they're going to do from week to week. The tone shifts, being able to get scarier and funnier at the same time. And then having this character piece, which is emotional and comedic and horrifying all at the same time. And truly just a surprise every week, a surprise this show gives us. Which brings us to this week. And I have to say, I'm going to start with the fact that watching this, maybe I need to watch it again. I'll be watching with my wife again today. Maybe I need to watch it again because my expectations maybe were a little too high coming off of this incredible trajectory. But what I'll say is that I bumped against this episode multiple times before I kind of fit into the rhythm. Although, and I'll leave this for my full breakdown, I need the show to do something for me here, given this particular episode, and I think it will. I'll explain myself soon. But I started to understand the rhythm of the show. Still definitely not my favorite, but it was starting to work for me. And certain moments were truly chilling, even earlier on. But, and here's the big but, and maybe it's because I was listening to this using my Apple AirPods, and the Apple TV app has the sound encoded in a way. There's an atmospheric setting for the surround sound that you can set on the app itself. Maybe that's what it was, because the sound design at the end of this episode chills down my spine. I was terrified. And by the way, I was just talking about Obsession this week. There's a couple of amazing scares in that film that primarily function. I shouldn't say they primarily function because of the sound. It's that the sound accentuates the visuals in such a way. And I think that this is like a new element. I mean, sound's always been so important to horror films, especially with like jump scares and things like that. But this is different. This is using sound to disturb. And I guess David Lynch is incredible at this, but I think a whole generation of filmmakers are picking up where Lynch left off. And primarily because of the sound, the final moments of this episode chilled me to the bone. And I cannot wait to see where this is headed to next. Okay, I do want to walk through the episode a bit. It's pretty intense, to say the least. So I presume we will see a lot more about this in the next week's flashback. The very first opening scene, almost certainly a flashback. How far back are we looking? Hard to know for sure. I'm assuming this is a very ancient flashback that we're seeing here, perhaps related to the diary entry we see later on. In the snow, we see that some black mushrooms have erupted, and someone has come upon them and excitedly scavenges them and consumes them. And we'll find out that these particular black mushrooms that only grow on this island have a particular effect on people who consume them. So, of course, we're immediately after the end of last episode, and Tom is wanting to have all outdoor activities canceled, no fireworks. This is completely untenable. And by the way, everyone is so furious about this. There are plenty of people on the island that didn't want to usher in these tourists, but now they've kind of made all these accommodations. And suddenly Tom, the person who was driving for all of this, is changing his mind and wants to lock everything down and is not even willing to explain himself. And then, of course, there's the whole other batch of folks that also want to see the island evolve And of course, one of these people who's most frustrated is his son, who's hanging out with some girls off the island. And of course, it is so easy, by the way, as I watch this show, and even the way that this actor plays the role, it's so easy for me to really dislike this kid. And as a middle-aged man, you get kind of annoyed at these kids when you always end up siding with the authority figure, being like, we're just trying to protect you kids. But over the course of this episode, of course, you see just how extreme this is. And this unspoken thing that is hinted at here in the very opening previously on, that the story is if you leave the island, you die. And of course, we get a very powerful flashback much later in the episode that is the origin not only of this mythology, but that something personally happened to him, to Tom, that of course has reinforced this superstition. But well before we get to that, Tom has to attend the funeral at the local church. Reverend Bryce has hung himself. Well, we assume he's hung himself. I actually do believe that he killed himself. But it is possible that what we see there, all this evidence burned, and the calls that Bryce was desperately trying to make, he may have actually been murdered by somebody, and that he was trying to follow the instructions that were left when the bell tolls, that there was a list of instructions he needed to follow. We haven't seen those pages yet, anyway, and they may very well have been burned. So maybe somebody was covering this up. I still think it's most likely that Bryce killed himself in some kind of mad panic, or that maybe this was the final thing he needed to do as part of his instructions. Of course, I'm sure that this is something that will be explained later in the series. There is this simultaneously creepy and funny moment where we see Bryce's face, this painting or photograph. We don't actually see his body, but we hear someone speaking and just kind of babbling. Like, I just saw him last week. I really didn't know him. He didn't talk to me. I guess we really didn't know each other. And I like that whoever is officiating this funeral says, just a reminder, not everybody needs to talk. The way this is done, conveyed, I should say, with the seeing the picture, Tom near the doorway, and we never see the participants. We just see this slow pan in on the picture of Bryce. Actually made me think about Hereditary and the funeral for the mother. So maybe that is an allusion to something that we might see later. Some connection between those projects. Or in both cases, of course, we're talking about a curse. Wick and Tom, and eventually Patricia, are all back in Bryce's office, and they see the scattered pages. Tom does have the idea to look at the calls he made. Of course, he called Tom's house. He feels bad about this. I guess he's never heard that message, which still doesn't have that many clues in it other than an apology. That's true. He did. I'm just playing it back in my mind now. He probably has not heard that message because he started playing it and then he left the room. But they find one other number. And Tom, completely terrible at any kind of improv here, but luckily Patricia's a little bit better at this and is able to find out who they're talking to, or at least their address. When they get there, very entertaining. This guy, I don't know who this actor is, but terrific, playing this role of the local healer / drug dealer / crackpot. And this running theme that no one's really interested in anything that Patricia says. They really should probably listen to her more. She was about to mention, oh, I know who this guy is. I think she's about to say, like, they almost hooked up in school or went to the prom or something. And she's about to interject this biographical information. And everybody's just talking over her. Not interested, as usual. Oh, and of course, importantly, they found these black mushrooms, which I presume now that Bryce had consumed some of these. And this is why he was in that kind of fugue state we saw when he runs into the kids last episode or 2 episodes ago, whenever that happened to be. Yeah, definitely 2 episodes ago. Apparently, this mushroom opens your third eye. And of course, importantly, back in Bryce's office, he carved onto his desk, my eye is open. He carved it twice. This drug dealer character, Todd, mentions that this is some serious stuff. He's not going to mess around with it, but he can help them go through a guided experience with the mushroom. They say, we think that Bryce took it and his eye was open, but then he killed himself, to which Todd says, I guess he didn't like what he saw. And then we hear this second story, just to scare everybody up the stakes here, that Todd had a friend in school who also went to school with Patricia, and that he had some kind of experience on this mushroom and was basically never the same again. He was a happy guy afterwards, but was partially crippled. And all he could do was keep drawing this drawing. This is one of the comedic highlights, by the way, of the episode, is that he made this figure. You have to see it. He just kept drawing it over and over again. And he's like, here it is. It's some kind of vague religious iconography. some sacred geometry. And it basically looks like a kid drawing over tracing their own fingers pretty badly. It's pretty funny stuff. I'm pretty certain, by the way, that this will actually correlate to something they're going to see later on. But in this moment, that this mythical image we have to see, which looks like a kid's doodle, was very funny stuff. So Wick decides that he's going to endanger his life and go on this vision quest because he needs to know what this mushroom will really reveal to them. Patricia just says Wick will take it, and very entertaining, Todd makes a tea out of the mushrooms. And I mean, I guess off screen, handed it over to Tom. He's like, "You're Wick, right? You didn't even taste it, right? It was nice preparation. Just sip it a little at a time." And of course, he has pounded that drink while he's on the phone checking in on his son. And they're like, "Don't worry, it's just a 12-hour experience. You'll be okay." Another comedic highlight here is the fact that Patricia's trying to convince him to throw up. And he's like, "I don't know how to. I can't do it. I never was able to." So who knew that being able to make yourself throw up was a skill you would need to learn? I especially like when Patricia's trying to force her fingers down his throat, being like, "It's easy. Look, let me show you." I don't want to know what that history with her making herself vomit is. They put him in the Peace Center, I think they call it, which is just this room with a lizard living in it, this large reptile. And of course, the punchline of this whole scene, as he has to leave to go check on his girlfriend's cats, is that the one thing you can't do is never look in a mirror. And then, of course, he closes the door and there's a full-length mirror. And at this point in the episode, where maybe a third of the way through, this was really working for me. They had kind of gotten back, they got away from, the show had become, I was like honestly thinking like, okay, I guess the show's just going to have to be much more horror now. And they kind of, you forget the fact that, of course, even when the stakes are this high, these people are still goofballs and screw-ups. So they're going to screw this up also. And the show is able to take things back into this more comedic tone. Well done. Oh, and by the way, this episode, directed by Andrew DeYoung, who directed a large part of The Chair Company, which we discussed here on the podcast relatively recently, and also the excellent film from last year, Friendship, both, of course, starring Tim Robinson. So his tone, when you think about those projects, definitely much more comedic, but with the uncanny and the horrific just under the surface. And that's really what you feel in this opening third of the episode or so. And now this is where the show started to lose me a little bit from a pacing standpoint. As everybody's freaking out, Tom is not fully descended into this experience he's having. We see from his POV, like all the lights on the set, literally on the set that they're shooting this on, blacking out, being turned off. And he goes to complete black and then emerges again, like his consciousness emerges again at some other point. Now, this is the thing I was mentioning before. I think that I need the show to do for me in subsequent episodes. And this would be very comedically rich. And I think that this is what we are going to see. I want to see the following episodes fill in the blanks, or maybe have one episode towards the end of the season where we see all the blanks that we skipped here, because there are just kind of moments where he's in one place and how did they get to the other place? And I'm sure that there's a lot of comedy there in between and some maybe clues for the storyline as well. But I did find this to be in the moment, a little jarring and a little repetitive, and kind of slowed the momentum of the episode. Although visually it's very clever, of course. Tom, of course, wants to go back to the office, although this is a terrible idea. The next time when he comes back to himself again, he is in the car with Patricia. She's very irritated with him. You assume he's been completely demented. And every time he startles awake, he also seems to be screaming. And because multiple people say, "Please stop screaming." And they also start every time you see him snap out of one of these reveries. So he's in the car, and then he's back at the office, and he wants Patricia to go help him find his son. He keeps hearing this sound, and as the sound becomes more pressing, he seems to go back into this lost time. Dale, played by Jeff Hiller, is here as well. He's supposed to be watching him. Apparently, that's not as easier said than done, I should say. And the worst thing he could do, of course, is going back to the office, because everybody there wants to attend this meeting, and he is in no condition to be trying to run any kind of meeting or have any kind of conversations. And he's going to have a lot of them, or rather stare like a deer in the headlights as people yell at him. Somewhere in here, during these kind of blackout periods, we have this ongoing storyline with Tom's son, Evan, and his friends who've been hanging out with these Boston girls. And this is also really creepy. And just as the show with this kind of pacing and the blackouts and the back and the forth was kind of losing some of the atmosphere, the show again is really amazingly able to rebuild that tension. Seeing this car here with the abandoned shack makes me think of maybe Texas Chainsaw Massacre, that kind of horror. So maybe another visual reference here of all these kind of Easter eggs of other things we've seen in the show. But we hear a little bit of this mythology of the boogeyman. And of course, if we've learned anything from watching this show is that what these things sound outlandish, but they are probably exactly literally true, which has happened multiple times now. And the story is, and by the way, I'm so happy to see the boogeyman come back because I thought that was such a chilling mythology to introduce. And I'm like, I hope that's not just like a little side detail and we never come back to it. I would love that to be fleshed out in more detail. So now at this point, I'm pretty sure this is going to play into the broader mythology. So eventually they were able to track down these calls that were coming into these girls' homes to this house, and they found the man who lived there, but they tried to kill him and they could not kill him. So now you're thinking about these supernatural serial killers like the Freddy Kruegers and Michael Myers and Jason Voorhees, of course, the slashers of the 80s who could not be killed. And that the myth, or the story is anyway, that this unkillable man was buried in the basement of his own house under tons of rock. Now, if this kind of is some kind of manifestation of the evil on the island, that earthquake perhaps released it. That's just where my mind's going right here at this moment. I'm sure this will be much more well fleshed out over time. We also saw actually these kind of doors, and in a deep underground locale in the very end of the pilot episode. So maybe that's what we're going to see. Maybe it wasn't actually just like buried in concrete. Maybe there was something more formal, like a gate that contained him, which is also part of this island's mythology. All remains to be seen. What does matter here is that multiple times, just like, of course, not only like telling the scary story, but like the slow pan in on the home and just this building of this mythology, very creepy stuff. And while the boys are out there trying to scare the girls and waiting for night to come so they can, I guess the goal is to eventually goad Evan into trying to go into the house, Tom is trying to be functional and failing miserably back at the office. Sheriff Bashir, of course, is really irritated about everything that's going on. Another really, I can't say enough about Kate O'Flynn, but when the sheriff drags her away, even though she was supposed to not leave Tom's side, and she just walks out of the room, and the way her flustered kind of throwing her hands up, just great. Every decision she makes here is just hilarious. Also very funny is Ruth here, Tom's secretary, coming in and just making eye contact with him and kind of taking these deep breaths, and the camera doing that vertigo shot while he's hearing these sounds. It's just very disturbing and just hilarious that all we're doing is watching Ruth's face as this is going on. Meanwhile, Wick is doing some real investigating here. Love Stephen Root. Have I mentioned enough on this recaps of just how absolutely brilliant Stephen Root is? And if you haven't seen his work on Barry, man, that show is great. Like I pointed out here, just in reference earlier to Hiro Murai's work. But man, Stephen Root on that show is incredible. But anyway, great here on this show as well. He's so able to be all over the place tone-wise. That's why the Coen brothers, for example, love him so much. He can sell the quirkiness and the comedy, but then become menacing, and now selling this kind of little romance here with him and the woman who works at the museum. And this page that was rescued turns out has some invisible ink on it, and they're able to read some of it here. But she's overtly talking about a curse that's fallen on the island and how it has something to do with this cylinder that my husband wears around his neck. I like how she ends this diary entry, by the way, where she's like, he's going to kill me. I don't know what the connection is between what's going on in her home and this plague. So there's a plague on the island here, which allows them to pinpoint around the time of this diary, because I guess it was the late 1800s that there was a plague reference in the history books. But a bizarre way to end this diary entry where she's like, he's trying to kill me. He probably will. He's going to crush my throat, but he's right here next to me. So I'm actually saying all this in jest. And with that, I'll go to sleep now. I will retire. Now, perhaps this is towards the later part of the episode, but perhaps the most effective of this kind of toggle on and off of his POV, of Tom's POV, is right before that actual town meeting occurs, where he gets informed that they're going to meet and they're going to be meeting soon. Are you okay? Are you okay? That's Dale, worried about him. And then we have the click, like lights turning off, and they turn back on, like on a stage set, and he's being berated by everybody in the town, just so angry at him for all the erratic decision making he's made. And then this is a really fascinating moment, which is disturbing because of this ellipsis in what's happened in the action. Everything goes black again. He comes back to, the room is empty. He has a marker in his hand, and written on the whiteboard is, when I turn around, everyone close their eyes. It's as if he made everybody disappear. I hope that's not the case, but who knows at this point. And then the momentum starts picking up again towards the end of the episode. We, of course, are back with the boys. It's nighttime now. Evan gets dared to approach the house. He's interrupted by Sheriff Bashir. He's like so happy that he's been interrupted. I do like the comedic elements of this and the character building, where first, Evan is so happy to not have to actually enter the house. Second of all, when Bashir tells him off, he's like, hey, as I'm walking away, can I tell you off to make me look tough in front of the girls? And he's like, absolutely not. And he's like, okay. And he runs off. But then like a little chuckle from the sheriff, a little, understanding. He's like, I was that kid one time. So I like this little character building here. Tom comes back too again. He is now with his research, this Scooby gang that he's formed with Wick and this woman who runs the museum, whose name I can't remember, so I really should write it down for next time. Of course, Patricia's there as well. And this is when we are able to better pinpoint the plague year. A funny and kind of cool visual here, by the way. One is that Tom has started to draw this like childish scrawl of a tracing of a hand, but we see his hand is being pulled by like a leash. And not only does he get pulled out of the room, but Patricia gets pulled via the same leash out with him. So interesting that something's pulling them that he can see. Oh, I almost forgot to bring this up. And he's not with Patricia immediately. He's actually with Rosemary, who's in the car with him. He comes to, she's gone from the car. It actually feels like a very creepy scene at that moment. He walks into this convenience store or the gas station. She's playing some scratch offs, but apparently he's already been in there and has already made a mess. He's going for the milk, I think is what it is. I wonder if the milk helps with the mushrooms, maybe to dampen down the effect. I'm not sure. But this scene goes from being kind of scary to being more comedic. He might have lost his shoe in the milk. Something happened. Evan gets home. Tom and Rosemary are standing there. Pretty creepy, actually. Tom very strangely looking through the car until he finally pinpoints him. He's like, out of the car, out of the car. This is a great performance, by the way. All this kind of uncanny behavior, very fun to watch. And of course, creepy at the same time. And then there's like a really interesting, again, Evan can be such an irritating kid given the circumstances, because of course we know his life's at stake. And the way he's like misconstrued, his dad is trying to control everything he does, control him. That's why he wants to be mayor. That's why he won't let him leave the island. It's just so he can control everything in his life. And of course, Tom, now finally seeing that's how his son sees him, and he needs to correct this, obviously, but he is in no state to be having this conversation. So he's just like, I got to go have this. We have to have this conversation, but later on. Because what he needs to do at that moment is go upstairs and puke. He's actually able to puke. Congratulations. Now, as I mentioned, this episode was a little bumpy, a little lumpy, some great moments, but not fully gelling the way some of the other episodes have. And then there's this really amazing final section of the episode. He's throwing up, and then through this doorway, it's as if he's being watched, but of course he's watching as well. He suddenly sees his wife again. We've seen her in another one of these moments in the series when he can't trust his own perception. He's been visited by her, and in this particular case, again, he remembers an earlier time she's pregnant, and they're leaving the island, perhaps to go have the baby, perhaps just to go on a trip before the baby comes. And she loses her sight on the ferry across back to the mainland. So I guess she was born on the island, and this is her curse of not being able to leave the island. And this, of course, is part of that mythology that if you're born on the island, you cannot leave. And what's fascinating here is I had assumed that she died in childbirth, for example, but it's possible she's not even dead because what happens here at the end, well, I mean, I don't know if he would lie about his wife being dead. That would be pretty cruel, although he could say this just so that his son would try not to go visit her. So maybe that's still possible. But it does seem like he's not the type of guy who would be lying about his wife being dead. That would be pretty messed up, a pretty ugly character trait if he's been telling everybody that she's dead for all this time. Anyway, reason I mentioned that is because we see the baby has survived and is healthy. However, the mom is alive. She didn't die. We actually see her, but the doctor says, give her time, give her time. So I do wonder, is she like on a mental institution back on the mainland or something? It would be really interesting if she's still out there. Even if not, even if she was driven insane after the fact or something like that, it would still be pretty interesting backstory. So we will know more. And then here's the part that creeped the hell out of me. He starts praying. Please, if there's a God, if there's anybody out there listening to me, please help me. Can you hear me? Please. And suddenly we see this camera move from that POV outside of the doorway where he's at the toilet and move in on him. And we hear this voice that we can't decipher, or at least I couldn't decipher it. And this is so chilling. It's as if there's been some evil presence waiting for this moment of weakness. And has he opened the door to some dark power? I guess we'll know next week. Even though we get a flashback episode, we also get a current storyline episode as well. So we won't have to wait that long. And by the way, this is episode 5. After those 2 episodes, we'll only have 3 more to go. So we are like rushing now past the midpoint of this series. And I am loving it. So tell me how you guys like this episode. Was this one a little harder for you than the previous ones? Are you more on board? Did you get freaked out by the final moments here of this episode? It freaked me out. Let me know. Email needsomeIntroduction@gmail.com or reach out to us, Patreon, Spotify, YouTube, anywhere you find us. Okay, with that out of the way, Alan has seen the series finale of The Boys, and we're about to talk about it for what I assume is going to be a pretty long conversation. So stay tuned. If you're just here for this content, I'll see you next week. All right, Alan. So this episode's on the main feed again. Welcome to the main feed. This is also similar to last week. I've been covering Widow's Bay, so we're going to keep going week to week on that. I don't know if you caught up on that.
All right. Oi.
I don't know if you caught up on that, but we're getting 2 episodes next week. 2 episodes of Widow's Bay next week.
Anyone who doesn't know me from the Patreon, I don't talk that way. But I have joked with Victor before that he needs everybody to have an accent. That's his, that's his crowd, the accented. But I'm glad you started recording. Usually we talk for a while, but this is good. You started recording right away because we still don't have any idea, I don't think, how either of us feels about the finale.
Yes, I'm intentionally leaving this ambiguous this moment.
I'll hold for the ambiguity.
Well, I'm actually not going to tip my hand here. I'm more curious to get a feel for, before we get into any kind of breakdown, what was your general feel for the episode? And maybe even before then, just the season leading up to this and your general opinion. I think you covered some of it on a previous conversation, but I don't think we actually explicitly just said, like, here's how I think this works as a final season of the show. Given that, like, just in totality, what did you think about this season 5? And of course, you could also give your general opinion of this episode.
Yeah, well, I think we pretty well established, or at least I hope it was clear, but I'll make it clear now regardless, that I was pretty well in the tank. I mean, I'm kind of in the tank for this whole show, but I agreed directionally with you that the 4th season was the weakest. But for me, that was like, a bunch of kind of A or even borderline A+ seasons, with like the season 4 being like an A- or something. Whereas if your whole kind of level, your floor and your ceiling are different from mine for this show. So, but I thought this was one of the best seasons, and especially the last kind of couple episodes, like concluding out the last few episodes of this season, I definitely think are among the best. I'm not ready to just crown them and be potentially guilty of recency bias. Not ready to crown them as being the best, but now that's where I was going into the finale. The question then is, did I then think that they kept that surge going, or did it drop off a little, or did it go off a cliff and like really jump the shark? You want me to reveal that yet, or are you still trying to tease it out?
No, we could go. We can jump right into it. I think.
All right.
We might as well. I mean, I do want to walk through the plot a little bit, but I think,
absolutely.
I think most people want to get that general feel.
The top line, yeah. Well, yeah, it's a sort of a boring report that's just still kept going. And, I wasn't, even though I am in the take for the show, I wasn't just totally sure, because Kripke even himself said in an interview leading into the finale that, endings are hard, and we all know that.
Sure, always.
Yeah, so I really wasn't sure, because it's I think most finales don't really perfectly land. And this didn't perfectly. I have a few nitpicks, but overall, I'm definitely giving it, an A, like a 5-star. Maybe not like sort of A+ or something, but it's definitely, I thought, was really, really well done.
Yeah, I mean, my opinion of it was that it was one of the better episodes of the season, maybe since maybe the first one or two.
Okay,
I'm not even sure this is the best episode of this season, but you know where I'm at with this show in general.
Yeah.
I was, and this is, not the show's fault. This is kind of like more something like a revelation that came about in my own watching of something. It really comes down to the fact that I've done this before, where I kind of hang around because I want to see how the story is going to wrap up. Like if there's some kind of reveal at the end that is clever or hasn't been done before.
Yeah.
But for me, and not the fault of the show entirely, it's just kind of my taste as well. I kind of was emotionally disengaged from the show in general and from the characters. So the reality is that what works here in the show, for sure, in this episode, is that everyone gets closure. And of course, if you have a lot of connection to these characters, I think this is probably pretty satisfying. Although, of course, the reaction right now has been extremely negative for the season and for this episode. However, the negative reaction is always going to be the loudest at first. So I'm not sure that's going to be the legacy of this whole thing.
Right.
But
yeah, well, that to me is surprising. I pretty much just finished watching and went right at, because I needed to catch up, as you know, on the Knicks game before that.
Right, of course. Yeah, I know. I was thinking, like, how are you going to get this in with the Knicks game rewatch, and then this is
coming home from school and then getting the Knicks game in, which was incredible. It's completely incredible comeback, and then getting this in, and I'm just coming in fresh. But yeah, whatever, people are gonna, if they're trying to say this is like a Game of Thrones type situation, or I would harken back to like the horrible BSG finale. If they're saying that, I'm just completely, agog at that, but I have my own opinion about it. So,
well, I mean, I don't, you probably listened to the film cast, but you heard like David Chen's reaction, where it's like, this makes the Game of Thrones finale like a masterpiece in comparison to this. That's his opinion of the final season.
The final season. No, I didn't catch that.
That was on the most recent episode. I don't think I would go that far with that analogy, but what I would say is I definitely feel sympathetic to people who would feel underwhelmed by this episode. For me, I guess my expectations weren't that high, and I do think this is better than what came before. And like I mentioned before, is that I think if there's an emotional investment in the characters, this does give you a lot of satisfying payoffs, and a lot of things do make sense.
I mean, you mentioned payoffs and sort of closing loops or whatever, and I would just, I guess I want to be more emphatic that I don't think that they just went through and checked the boxes. That's easy enough to do. And Aaron Kripke did say in an interview that he was going to kind of try to give fans what they want, which can be kind of shallow fan service. And I was a little nervous about that comment, but I thought the boxes may have been checked, but I thought they were checked more closer to like a Vince Gilligan level of checking at the end of Breaking Bad or something like that, which some people even criticized in that show, but I think it was done extremely well at an extremely high level. The fan service, if you want to call it that, or kind of certain expected confrontations and so on, and sort of, emotional moments and so on and so forth, I thought were all done, or almost all done, at an extremely high level of skill and just, really pulling it off.
Oh, when I'm saying payoffs, I don't mean that in a derogatory way.
Okay.
As far as we got to get this done, we got to get that done. As a matter of fact, in some ways, it doesn't really pay off in that way. I meant I think that if you have particular characters you really like, they get appropriate to their kind of true to their character kind of payoffs, like, and we could get into it because there's at this point, there's no spoilers, but if anybody hasn't watched, I guess we're just going to start spoiling now anyway. But like, for example, Butcher's ending, I think, is apropos what happens to Homelander. As a matter of fact, I actually think that's a great idea of like seeing a depowered Homelander. I actually proposed that we should have had a season of a depowered Homelander.
Yeah, I wouldn't have minded that at all.
Interesting character. So, I'm totally in favor of that.
When he was depowered so relatively early in the episode, I thought, okay, we're gonna get a little tour of Homelander, maybe being brought up before Congress, and having to sort of like, spoilers for Andor here, skip ahead like 30 seconds if you haven't seen one of the greatest shows of the 21st century.
Seriously.
But the way that Dedra ends up there, she's just, no one dramatically kills her. She's just sitting there in a prison, a similar prison that we had seen earlier in the series. But so I thought we could get something like that. But then when Butcher killed him, and there's still like 25 minutes left to go, I'm like, wait, what's going on? And I was, I can be naive, I guess. I didn't see the next thing, the next sort of worm turn where Butcher's going to still use the virus and all that kind of stuff. But then it made sense as soon as it developed. I'm like, oh, right, of course, because he's always said we can't have any soups. It's not just we can't have Homelander. So,
did you feel the shortness of this? I mean, I was really surprised where it's only a 60-minute episode. Mm-hmm. I think it's like Kripke said it was like an hour and 6 minutes, but minus credits, minus the behind the scenes photographs,
right,
and minus the previously on, we're not even at an hour on the episode.
Yeah, I thought it was a good length. I don't necessarily endorse like having.
Oh, it doesn't always have to be big. I mean, I agree with that. Yeah, I was just asking for your.
Yeah, because I think part of it you can just put whatever you want to do with such a long finale. You could just put some of the setup of it in the previous episode.
Right. Which honestly, that's where I would be critical of just, I have many criticisms about a bunch of things, but I mean, just critically in how they structured these last couple of episodes. I feel like the plot was pretty slow in the last few episodes. And I personally would have preferred to have more setup, even in the previous episode. There was a lot of complaints, obviously, despite the fact that you had one of the biggest deaths of the show in the last episode, that there were a lot of complaints on. I think last week's episode is maybe the lowest rated episode on IMDb, for example, as a metric.
Okay, that's crazy.
But I mean, again, we don't know if those numbers are going to hold up or if it's just an immediate reaction. But I do bring it up as that's kind of like the feeling of the moment. And part of that, I think, would be that I think it would have been better to have more setup in the previous episode, to have even more of this coda in the current episode, to be honest, because I would have liked a little more space for a lot of these things to happen.
I mean, I didn't think that the previous episode, I'm looking back at my ratings here, I had it as a 4 out of 5 stars on my app, and there's only, let's see how many other episodes this season. I also did that for the 4th episode and probably the premiere, because I almost always do, the premiere. So 1st, 4th, and 7th, I had 4, and then the rest of them I have as 5-star episodes. But I still, to see it as, I have some episodes earlier in the series that I rated lower than that, and
I personally liked this episode. I'm sorry, last week's episode. I personally liked that episode. I think people are judging it because it's a penultimate episode. But as just an episode of TV, I actually thought last week's episode was one of the strongest episodes of the season, because I felt like, for me, like the episode when they were like a 3-star episode for me would be the episode where they're, they go to the military base and they're all turning on each other. And then they find the radiation chamber. And it's like, all of that was like, I really felt like it was padded out for that one, for one bit of season building, I would say. So episode for me felt mostly like filler.
Which episode was that? Can you remember? I'm not exactly sure.
This is the one where they I think it's a Russian lab.
And which number of the season?
Oh, I don't remember what number it was, but it was the one where at one point Homelander's inside that room where the radiation is there, and Soldier Boy traps him in that room. And they're all sort of turning on each other because there's something that makes you insane, like crazy and angry, basically, as you get closer to.
I thought that was well done too. I don't know. I mean, people people rate, like even with the 7th episode, the penultimate, that I rated a little lower, along with a couple others, than a little lower than average or whatever for the season. Like, I still, if it's a 4 out of 5, it's like a 4.4 out of 5 or whatever. I still thought, I don't know. And the one you're talking about, like, still totally worked for me. I'm just like in a mode of de gustibus, and sometimes I'm the one that, or I guess this is the case where I'm going really against the grain, but in this case, it's in the positive way, whereas there's other times where I'm really dogging on something that a lot of other people like. So whatever.
And by the way, this is all anecdotal too, right? Like I'm looking at like Reddit reactions, so I'm not sure that represents the average.
I did pull up Reddit real quick, and I saw the top rated thing would be something I would totally endorse, which was the moment of the smash cut from President Ashley Barrett declaring that she had done nothing wrong to the news anchor thing that was former president.
Yeah, that was actually a lot of fun. Some of those beats were actually well done.
But that was that's the top rated comment on the main boys finale episode or whatever. So that's the most upvoted comment that's sort of leading the way.
Well, interesting. I mean, maybe that says something in and of itself, because it's not like Homelander being defeated or something.
Well, I guess you could say that, but it wasn't like the top voted thing was just like, what a disappointment, or how,
True. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. Let's get into the plot a little bit as we go through it. So we open up. This is pretty effective, I thought. That, we have Frenchie's funeral, of course. That was, again, emotionally, I think the big plus for the season was Frenchie's loss last week.
Right. And it was a nice little bit of staging, just probably a subtle moment, but I thought well done to have Sage sort of standing back, like she's part of the team now, but she wasn't really like,
she didn't really know him.
Like
yeah.
Frenchie's. Yeah.
And of course he has this lewd article, this, note he's left behind. He doesn't actually own anything, so he doesn't actually have a last one.
So the boys, we have to have something completely just scatological and ridiculous.
Always.
They were pushing it there, but I still kind of smiled.
And of course, he's, I've seen all your bungholes, and that's how close we are to each other. That's family right there.
That is, yes. Touching moment.
And the final payoff for this, of course, is that Sage is trying to intentionally go at Kimiko here in her most vulnerable moment to see if the power works. And of course it does. And Sage has some pretty comedic moments where she all of a sudden is like, oh, wait a second, that's not even the U.S. government. And she's just like, you're just a dummy like you got.
You skipped past like my first eight sections of notes. I guess we're flying through the episode.
Oh, I just skipped to that part, but yeah, please do add any.
Okay, well, let's just sort of dialing back a little bit here. I really liked the Homelander at Ryan's cabin scene. Like, the way he came flying in, and then did his usual pompous bullshit, was showing that little bit of vulnerability. He was trying to sort of beg his son back, and then there's sort of a fake, or what Vince Gilligan, the aforementioned Vince Gilligan, called schmuck bait fake out, where Ryan's going dad, and it's sort of like slight implication that maybe there's going to be some rapprochement there, but he's just like, get fucked, scaring people into calling you God doesn't make you God, and deep down I think that. So it was deeply satisfying to me to hear him read his dad for filth on there.
I actually, I had a separate section I was going to discuss that for sure, but that's actually a highlight for me.
Okay,
definitely
cool.
Ryan's conversation with him is one of the better pieces of dialogue here. And also that Homelander, in a way, is mature in his own way, mature enough to not just fly off the handle, although he still feels like, in the end, he'll still win him over or whatever. Or maybe he just can't take the bruise to his ego again. But at least he does kind of leave him alone and leave, as opposed to trying to like beat him unconscious again.
Right. He doesn't do that. But I didn't feel that he left thinking he was going to win him over. I think he left feeling sort of, defeated, but his usual like way of, and of course he's become more and more of the season. It's like a Trump analog, but just of like blustering and sort of, fulminating that he's gonna like it's kind of more not so much that he thinks that Ryan's going to come around, but like I don't need him anyway, kind of
Right.
get rid of all the non-believers, and it just gins him up even, might make him even more dangerous, if they don't stop him at that point. So,
well, I mean, it's pretty clear by the end of the, when he goes off script towards the end of the episode that he's, I mean, at that point, it's like the show is putting its thumb on a scale so severely that it's like they're just explicitly saying that left to his own devices, he's going to eventually eradicate everybody. I mean, he's ready to eradicate anybody who is not willing to accept him as God at that moment. And we already know from this, his tests last episode or 2 episodes ago, whenever that was, that only like 20% of his true believers are even willing to go along with this. So it's like, What is he just saying? Okay, like 95% of the population gets annihilated, and maybe he's okay with that.
Yeah, no, I think he is. He's going to purify the flame and just get it down to the very, skim it down to, and that's what one of the things I think is so effective about this as overall as a finale is that I've acknowledged, as much as I love the show, I've acknowledged that to go for 5 seasons, they've had to continually do the kind of like, oh, we're on the edge of, either the boys defeating him somehow or him just doing a final defeat on them and have anybody decent, and sort of back and forth, but then you've always got to hit a reset button so that you can kind of keep spinning it out. And some of the side quests are ultimately not that important. But now that it's just the end and they just burn it all as they go, it's like, okay, no, now we truly have a literal countdown clock to where, if you don't do it by then, you may as well because what you'll have left, you won't have, I guess, every human on Earth dead, but you'll have only the most horrific fascists left on Earth at that point. So
right.
I guess you could try to save the human race for the long term after that, hoping that the further future generations won't be so awful. But you really pretty well lost if you don't stop him by that point, by the time the clock goes down to get the psychics and the assassins and everybody out ready to purify.
We're jumping around here, but I wanted to ask you a question when we'll come back into like more of the chronological conversation. I did like that. Once again, we're jumping towards I was going to say the end. It's not the end, it's the middle. But we're jumping towards that confrontation in the Oval Office. I did love when he's like telling Butcher, it's like, oh, you're going to kill me now? Do you know how many times I could have killed you? And I'm like, well, at least they're acknowledging that fact that he did actually kind of look the other way and let him many, many times over the course of this.
Yeah, well, this show, like most shows nowadays, will do definite lampshading, and you can go to TV Tropes to look that up if you're not familiar, but it's, they definitely lampshaded that aspect and but I was almost in a way spoiled. Did you ever go and listen to any of the interview the Kripke interview that I sent you?
Oh, no, I didn't, but I've heard, I know this is the excerpt where he basically says that Homelander, I don't know why I'm being afraid of spoiling. I guess we're spoiling everything. But he had said in an interview that like about Homelander being dead at the end of the show. So pretty much revealing that Homelander would be dead, right?
Crap. No, he didn't say anything like that on the one that I heard. That's pretty bad if he said that to somebody. I thought it was slightly spoilerish because he said that like most of the time, and I don't know, we could scour through history and see how true this is, but the most of the time the extreme kind of, cult of personality dictators end up going too far at some point, and then they're kind of exposed or whatever to the public or whatever. And so it's kind of a, shoot, this is a spoiler for a really great movie. I guess I can say spoiler alert, but then even that itself is a little bit of a spoiler. But I definitely highly recommend watching Face of the Crowd. And if you skip ahead a little bit here, it'll spoil a little less. But definitely the way that they did the camera still being on and on its side and all that kind of stuff was a Face of the Crowd kind of moment. And that's what he sort of seemed to be implying in that interview, but I can't believe he was telling people that Homelander would be dead at the end. That's a big faux pas, if you ask me. Yeah,
he said it very flippantly about a week ago in an interview that I honestly just found it last night. Apparently this interview's been around. This is part of the conversation on the Reddit boards. And he was basically saying he basically says just in passing that thinking about what the show might be if they continued in some way after Homelander is dead. So I'm like, okay,
whoops.
well, that kind of gives away the end of this season.
That was a major screw up. No, the one that I sent was much less spoilery than that, but it was, I suppose then that you interpreted the email differently than what I was sending you, because when I said your theory was busted, you probably thought I just meant because, oh no, Homelander's going to
Homelander's definitely not going to be victorious at the end. Right?
Yeah, no, it was just more about what I had said, like the previous past couple episodes that we discussed about this, that he was talking about how do you, when you've been doing this show for 4 seasons and it's kind of, he said, not cynical, but, and I'm thinking in my head, is he saying not cynical, but I'm thinking that Victor's already said it is really a cynical show. But he's then talked about how, but you want to then pivot towards, no, we have to have a solution. There has to be hope and all this kind of stuff. Right. And I'd already been catching signs of that in the last couple episodes, but you were so infused with the cynical kind of edge of it before in previous seasons that you're still kind of looking for that in the finale. And so that's what I was saying. I'm saying, unless he's totally lying about this, that he really is leaning towards, no, we've got to finish with hope. And maybe there could be a criticism, or maybe you'll make it that you can't do that so late in the proceedings or whatever. But I at least felt they were setting it up for a few episodes to close out the season. And indeed, that was where they went. In fact, I would say that they really put, you'll see in a lot of shows or movies, there'll be some sort of character who kind of is stating the creator or the screenwriter's mission statement. And that was definitely, I think, we've seen it already in a few other scenes, but it was kind of most perfectly boiled down. And when Starlight says, it's about keeping the light fucking burning as long as we fucking can. And, includes the F-bombs to keep from feeling like a line out of a Hallmark Channel Christmas movie or something. And we also preface the scene by having the girl from Gen V, which I, by the way, enjoyed seeing them for a little bit. I would have liked to have more of them. But having that girl from Gen V roll her eyes and say, Ernest o'clock. But all that, the F-bombs and the Ernest o'clock is all there to really smuggle in a ooey gooey sentimental central philosophy, I think, that Kripke's presenting. And he's not fundamentally, unlike, I think, maybe somebody like what's the guy who did Walking Dead and Invincible. He to me seems like he more does have a truly dark, sour view on the world, that he's not going to come around to a sentimental, hopeful viewpoint. But it's Kirkman, that's what I was trying to think.
Yeah. You have to get caught up on Invincible. And I don't know how the comic books go, although I heard that this is a faithful adaptation that's renewed for 2 more seasons.
Oh, okay, that's true. I'm like 2 seasons behind on that, but I've also, of course, seen some of his other content, and it just seems like but no, I guess even as far as I'd gone in with Invincible, come to think of it, they did show Omni-Man kind of like actually getting in trouble with his own people because he sort of softened up a little bit. So that's true. That's fair.
Yeah, Omni-Man, if you want to correlate it to this.
Sorry for the spoiler, but
yeah, minor spoilers here, but
yeah.
if you wanted to correlate, this is spoilers actually. So if you have not seen Invincible, which I do recommend you watch, especially as like a interesting extra text to this, even though they're not from the same creator,
right.
But Omni-Man is on a journey. Like the whole time he is learning what it's like to be a human. And that is something that is really in counterpoint to, obviously Homelander, who never has that trajectory to his character, which he doesn't need to. I want to be clear that I'm not saying that they should have the same. Yeah. He should have softened up over time and realized he's a jerk. I think, one of the things, if the show's saying anything, has that?
They have had some softened moments for him, like he's looking in the mirror and talking to himself and things like that. They faded more away from that in this final season.
That's where honestly, as he's become a less complex character, that's kind of, and because you're right. Like there's a moment early on where I thought that he was trying to redeem himself. He like really wanted to be like, I think that's, for me, I think the not to relitigate the whole entire series, but you go back to like season 2, I think it was probably.
Well, this is the time to relitigate the entire series if you ever.
I guess so, because I'm not going to watch any more of these shows after this. But to that point, I think that's when the show was most intriguing to me, when it's like he's like, I am a good guy. I am that vision of who I'm supposed to be. But then he realizes he's working for these like very corrupt corporate overlords. So that's not like a good parent for him. He's like, he doesn't have a good figure to parent his worst impulses. And then deep down inside, he knows, and we know, that even when he's trying to be good, it's still just this egomania and this like a never-ending need that is driving him, which I think is a interesting psychological insight into people who are like that in the real world. Like Homelander now is just like, when he's like, I literally want to be God, you understand that this is just his, never ending need, just going higher and higher and higher. But that is kind of the trajectory he's been on for multiple seasons now. So it just wasn't that
yeah, for sure.
Interesting. I mean, like, we literally see that where he's just like, I'm not even going to pretend that I'm just like, I'm Homelander and I'm here to protect America and everybody better watch out. Then he's just like, I'm basically the president. I'm actually God. And that was basically the last 3 seasons. I'm like, okay, like being God and being the president of the United States of America, that is also terrifying everybody else on the planet from even ever taking any action against the US. I guess being God is even more insane, but it doesn't really give him any more power my point is that he's already kind of maxed out on power on this show a long time ago. So.
Well, I'll argue with that a little bit. As we've talked before, apologies to our religious listeners, and and we've talked before that this is probably the most blasphemous show that's ever been on TV, or at least major.
Yeah, if you're watching this, you probably are okay with religious,
right? Except that who was it though? That it was that's right. It was like an audio commentator to another boys podcast that commented. He's like, I'm a Christian, so some of this, it was that very episode we were talking about where they were talking about Mary and Joseph and all that stuff. Remember with Soldier Boy, that he said he was made to feel a little uncomfortable. He still loves the show, but he was made to feel a little uncomfortable. And I was like, yeah, that would be a tough moment for someone who, and there apparently is at least one person like that who is pretty religious and watching the show. But to me, so all that is a preamble to say, to me, the like jealous God who wants you to be just like show utter fealty to you and to strike down anyone else that disputes your way of being. That's not the modern kind of soft loosey-goosey form of like Christianity or Judaism, although you still have some like extreme Orthodox Jews that particularly project some of that forward. But like certainly the classic, you can just look at the text of Deuteronomy. It says you got to take anybody that's not 100% on board, you got to take them down to the city gates and stone them to death. That's just, you must do this so that all Israel will see it and be afraid. So that's there in the real so-called real God.
You're looking at Old Testament, New Testament, right? Like, so you think about the difference between the Old Testament is the, wrathful God, like kill your son to prove your love to me.
Right.
And, the New Testament is turn the other cheek, right? So there's like a huge disparity between those two. And of course, squaring that circle is a whole other conundrum.
Right. But so to me, it didn't seem too ridiculous to think that a figure like Homelander would insist on just pure fealty and pure like devotion to him, and then anyone else who isn't on board with that program needs to be killed, because we've seen that in real major religions of this earth. So
like Khmer Rouge or something, right? You think about that.
Sure, that too. Yeah, that too. North Korea to this day, there's lots of examples of it. So yeah, it didn't strike me as off base.
Oh no, I don't say. I'm just talking about as the entertainment. My interest in the character over time. Not that there is ever, as we know in the real world, we're like, well, how much more power could they possibly want? And it's like, apparently infinite more power.
Yeah.
If anybody, it's not even like, it's like, well, you're already the most powerful person. They're like, but some people still have a little bit of power in some situations. It's not satisfying to me. So in that case, it's absolutely true to these, masters of the universe who are, the most powerful people in the world who are never happy with whatever they have.
Yeah. Oh, speaking of Masters of the Universe, I didn't put this on my notes, but now that kind of jogged in memory. I thought it was an interesting little moment where they had the billionaire who thought he was Master of the
Yes,
Universe.
He's in space. I love that. That's a good one. Yeah, that was like. So that's just part one of the conversation. Alan and I had many more things to discuss, many more digressions, but actually a file too large for this audio feed. So check out the Patreon. The rest of the conversation is there. Free to listen to, so please do check it out. Later this week, Sona and I will be breaking down the next episode of Your Friends and Neighbors, more Euphoria to come, and of course, next week, a double episode of Widow's Bay. Make sure you subscribe, give us a 5-star rating if you haven't already, and if you'd like to support the podcast, aside from joining the Patreon, recommend this to your friends and family. It's the #1 way we grow the show. Thanks, and I'll talk to you soon.